Imagine a city that once had more millionaires than New York. A city built on cotton, on suffering, and on the enslavement of human lives. Natchez, a pearl above the Mississippi River. Here, beauty meets darkness. Here, behind the walls of grand mansions, live stories of power, pain, and courage. Welcome to Natchez, a city that was once the richest place in America, and is still learning how to live with its conscience. Natchez was not always just a quiet town above the river. Long before the arrival of Europeans, this land was home to the Natchez people. They worshipped the sun. They built sacred mounds, and their world seemed as steady as the very ground beneath their feet. Their world was ordered and clearly defined. Society was built on the mother. Lineage, status, and inheritance were passed through the women. Men often moved into the household of their wives, and the new leader was not the ruler's son, but the son of his sister. It was a world where power and tradition were born through the female line, and where faith, ceremony, and everyday life revolved around the sun. But then the French arrived. There was trade, alliances, and, in the end, conflict, rebellion, fire, dehumanization, and the original people of this land disappeared, scattered among other tribes, or lost forever in the pages of history. Meanwhile, Natchez became a gateway to wealth. The Mississippi River was the great artery of trade, and cotton became king. Planters, bankers, adventurers, and speculators poured into the city. Grand houses rose above the river, adorned with columns and balconies, and the city drowned in luxury. But that luxury came at a price. The wealth of Natchez rested on the enslaved labor of thousands of people who had no freedom, no voice, and no control over their own fate. At a place called Forks of the Road, one of the largest slave markets in all of America, human beings were bought and sold like property. Families were torn apart. Children were taken from their mothers, and the city grew richer still. Natchez lived in a strange paradox: refined elegance, culture, theaters, and grand balls, and just a few streets away, human suffering beyond words. When the Civil War came, Natchez found itself caught between two worlds. The city was never a major battlefield. Union forces occupied it with little resistance, and cannon fire and flames never tore through the streets the way they did elsewhere in the South. And so the grand houses remained standing. Their columns, balconies, and gardens survived the fall of the old world. After the war, the plantations were never the same again. The wealth was gone, but the houses remained as silent witnesses. Today they remind us not only of the elegance of the past, but also of the price at which it was built. In the very heart of Natchez stands St. Mary Basilica, one of the most beautiful Catholic churches in the American South. Its neo-Gothic silhouette began to rise in the 19th century and was completed in the late 1880s. Inside, you find colorful stained glass, soaring vaults, and a stillness that seems to stop time itself. The church became the spiritual home of the local community, surviving the Civil War, economic hardship, and the many changes the town has gone through. Today, it is not only a national historic landmark, but also a living symbol of Natchez, a place where history and faith intertwine, and where you realize that even a small town can have a very large heart. We've just arrived at our home for the night, Monmouth Historic Inn, one of the most beautiful and historically significant houses in Natchez. This gracious mansion was built at the very beginning of the 19th century in 1818 by John Hankinson, a local official and businessman here in Mississippi. A few years later, Monmouth became the home of one of the most prominent men in the region, General and later Governor of Mississippi, John A. Quitman, who moved here with his wife Eliza Turner and their family. During his years at Monmouth, Quitman became known not only as a statesman and soldier, but as a defining figure of the Southern elite, a man who left a lasting mark on the history of Natchez and the surrounding region. The house was gradually altered and expanded until it gained the elegant Greek Revival appearance we see today, with its wide columns and imposing facade. In the early evening, we head out for a walk through the town. The sun slowly sinks over the Mississippi River, and its light reflects off the columns and balconies of the old houses. Here, architecture is more than just beauty. It is a reminder of a time when Natchez was among the richest cities in America. Every house has its story. Some are elegant and silent, others still seem to whisper of times that were not fair to everyone. Just beyond the center lies a place that is impossible to overlook, Forks of the Road. It was here that one of the largest slave markets in the United States once stood. People were brought here from the east and sold on to plantations across the Mississippi Valley. Families were divided, lives were broken, and the wealth of Natchez continued to grow. We end the evening down by the river, in an area known as Under the Hill. This was once the place where steamboats docked, and a lively waterfront world thrived, full of bars, gambling, sailors, and adventurers. And one of those bars is still here today, the Under the Hill Saloon. We finished the evening next door at the Magnolia Grill, and although, in the end, we went for burgers and seafood rather than traditional Southern dishes, we still enjoyed the night. The walk back, however, wasn't quite as relaxed. Nighttime Natchez has a very different atmosphere than during the day. The streets feel empty, at times a little wild, and you become more alert very quickly. Now and then you come across people offering drugs or behaving unpredictably. The next day begins at one of the most famous houses in all of Natchez, Stanton Hall. This grand mansion, which looks almost like a Parisian villa in the heart of the American South, was already standing here by the mid-19th century. It was built by Frederick Stanton, a wealthy cotton merchant, as a symbol of his success and of his dream of a truly magnificent home. Construction took several years, and at first glance you can see that this was never meant to be an ordinary home. Marble fireplaces, French mirrors, and lofty ceilings all speak of wealth and refined taste. But shortly after the house was completed, its owner died, and the home passed on to the next generations. After the Civil War, it even served for a time as a school for young ladies, where they were taught manners and the skills that society of the day considered essential. And today, the Pilgrimage Garden Club, a local women's historical society, cares for Stanton Hall and has opened it to the public. Thanks to them, we can step inside and glimpse the kind of life that was lived here more than 160 years ago, and realize just how deeply the history of this city is rooted, both in light and in shadow. And our final stop is Magnolia Hall. This house is not only an architectural jewel of Natchez, but also the former home of a family deeply entwined with the history of the Civil War. Its builder, Thomas Henderson, had two sons who went off to fight for the Confederacy. One of them was wounded in the war, the other was captured by Union troops. And after the war, like so many others, they had to apply to have their civil rights restored. And here in Magnolia Hall, a remarkable document is still on display. A presidential pardon signed by Andrew Johnson, President of the United States. The original parchment is a reminder of a time when the nation was trying to piece itself back together, and when individual families were slowly finding their way back to ordinary life.